Hi, this is Bob Wells here, and welcome to Undercurrent Stories. This is the show where we hear about people's interests and uncover some fascinating stories at the same time. I hope you enjoy today's show. Hello and welcome to Undercurrent Stories. In today's show, I'm joined by Rob Moore. Rob Moore is a self-made entrepreneur, co-owner and founder of Progressive Property. He runs his own podcast, which is one of the UK's most successful podcasts with over 1,000 episodes to date. And he has his own foundation, the Rob Moore Foundation, which aims to help young people being entrepreneurs, those that are perhaps underprivileged. In addition to that, he is the best-selling author of 19 books. I could go on, but obviously that's why I'm going to talk to Rob here today. Hello, Rob, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
It's great to have you on.
Thanks for coming to our studio.
Yeah,
I believe this is your first video.
Yes, it
podcast.
is. It is. So, it's going to be an interesting interview, I'm sure. Thank you very much for inviting me to your facilities. Looking forward to this. I've been listening to your podcast, Disruptors, probably for about a year now.
Wow.
And what I like about it is the fact that you've got a huge variety of guests.
Where did you first find out about my show? I'd be interested.
Do you know what? You were on another show, but I can't actually remember which show it was. And I remember, and you obviously mentioned
me
it.
from there.
Yeah, that's right. So that's how I did it. And
at least we got one from all those interviews. It works, clearly.
Yes, clearly does. But it's interesting. I mean, obviously, I've been following what you're doing with your business and your foundation, which is absolutely fantastic. I mean, that video, I urge anybody to see that video with when you did the Guinness Book of Records world record for the longest speech, and you went to the Sue Ryder hospice. I mean, it's so moving. And you, was it £100,000?
I think 125-ish on one raise, 120 on another raise. Yeah.
And that got me, because this podcast that I do, I mean, we talk to people about what they do and the success and everything, but there's always that thing of what can you do a bit extra, and I think you certainly show that. That's one of the reasons I wanted to interview you.
Thank you.
Anyway, what I'd like to know, I'm curious, and I'm sure listeners and viewers would be very interested to start with, what drove you? Could you just give us a bit of your background when you were a child and where you are now, to what actually drove you to become who you are now?
How young do you want me to go? When I was 2, 3, I have memories of being alone in my cot while my mum and dad were working downstairs in the pub. And the room seemed so huge. And my therapist, who I employ from time to time, believes that this was the start in building up a strong need to be liked and loved and noticed, because there was a lot of absenteeism in my childhood. And then when I was 11, I got really overweight. My mum and dad had the pub. And one of the downsides was me always being alone every evening. But one of the upsides was free Coca-Cola, free Walker's Crisps, free games of pool, pinball, fruit machine. And my mum and dad didn't know any better, because I don't think the information around health and sugar was as good back then. By the way, I don't blame my parents one iota.
No.
I'm so grateful to everything that they did. But I used to just drink bottles of Coke like it was water, because it was there literally on tap. And so I got really fat. And I guess my parents just didn't notice it, and all of a sudden there it was. And so at school, that same feeling of loneliness and everyone absent from my life came out again. And so as I look back, I have looked back over many years, I noticed that I developed some pretty good skills from that, which have also been a great challenge for me growing up. So one of them, for example, is people pleasing. Very good at people pleasing.
And is that still the case?
is there, but I've learned to be also Rob pleasing.
Yeah.
Because the problem when you're a people pleaser is you're never pleased, because you put others before you, or at least you learn how to please and appease people so that you can get their attention when you don't get people's attention. Now, if you've been surrounded by love and attention, you'll never need to do this, and you'll have a different problem. You might have an entitlement problem, or you might have a complacency problem. Yeah. One of the reasons you're asking me about my childhood is because all of ours are individual. Yeah. And then conflict avoiding was another great skill I learned. I mean, I could avoid any conflict.
You basically didn't like confrontation?
No, because confrontation meant people would leave me. Avoiding conflict meant people wouldn't leave me. Yeah. People pleasing meant people would stay. Non-people pleasing meant people would go. And I didn't like being on my own. No. And only until maybe the last 7 or 8 years have I enjoyed my own company. I could not be alone. Wow. And I really wanted a girlfriend when I didn't have one. I felt so lonely when I didn't have one. And I'd always want to be around mates. I could never do anything on my own. It's funny because my wife's the opposite and she just loves time on her own. And that works for us because obviously I could be busy at times. And I'm probably more needy than she is needy. In fact, I'm probably more the female role. I'm more emotional. I always tell her how I feel over and over and she just sits there and says nothing and says, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah. So these were the things that impacted who I became as an adolescent and a young man. And for probably until maybe the age of 30, I hated that about myself. And now I'm okay with that because it makes me who I am and I'm happy with the results and the progress I've made in my life. But it was good to know these things. And so they stopped me from really getting ahead because I couldn't handle conflict. I still at times don't like it now, but I make myself face conflict. I mean, if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to face conflict. If you're a landlord, you have to face conflict with your tenants. If you're an employee, you have to face conflict with your staff. Yeah. You can't, if I people please with all my staff, they'll all end up being rich and I'll end up being broke. So, you have to find the balance. And this is one of the reasons why I love being an entrepreneur is because, you can have these, I'm going to call them personality flaws. They're actually not. But let's call them personality flaws. In your normal life, in your social life, if you have these personality flaws, what they do is repel some people and attract some people. And you can go about your life not really being too affected. But in business, the immediate effect is increased overhead, reduced profit, staff leaving, and you get immediate feedback in business from these character traits.
You're in the wild, aren't you?
And it's sink or swim, fight or flight. And so I learned very quickly to be decisive. I learned very quickly to face conflict. I learned very quickly to eat the frog and do the hard things first. I learned very quickly to Rob please and client please as well as people please. And so in that regard, I mean, personal development's been a great teacher to me. My therapist's been a great teacher to me. But I would say business and entrepreneurship has been the greatest teacher because it's real.
Yeah. And that's really your foundation with what you're doing now, I guess.
Yeah. So in the previous podcast that I just did, I was asked about what my goals are. And I think when you're broke, having a goal to get out of debt is a good goal. But, once you've made your 10th or your 100th million, a good goal is how many people can you help and how many people can you impact. And that's why I set up my foundation. And I set up my foundation in my 30s, whereas most people do it in their 60s. Yeah. And that was because I'd already become financially free and independent myself. And so I wanted my goal to be about how many lives I could impact as well.
Something you feel very strongly about?
Well, I think it's my responsibility as someone with a humble amount of success that I help as many people as I can. Because once I die, what's my impact going to be? No one's going to care how many cars I had. I've got 7, but no one's going to care.
But you might as well enjoy them at the time.
Well, yes. But when I die, is anyone going to care how many cars I had, or are they going to care if I help them?
Yeah.
Is my legacy going to be, how many? It will take weeks for every human on this planet to forget how much money I had. But it might take a century for them to forget, the books I wrote and the content I created.
Yeah. I think that's a good one. I mean, I lost my father about 4 years ago, and I remember going to the funeral, and people don't remember much about what he did with his job. It was all about how he made them feel. And if he made them feel good, which I think is how it remembered.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you formed Progressive.
Yeah.
Was that about 2005, 2006?
January 2007 we incorporated.
Right, okay. Yeah.
So Feb 2006 I got a job in a property sourcing company, and we bought 20 properties. Well, I bought 20 properties with other people's money in that year. We flipped some, we kept some. And then we started our own property company, Jan 2007.
I mean, the interesting bit, I think, is I think you started off as an artist, didn't you? And then transferring across. What made you suddenly think, well, I don't want to do this. I want to be an entrepreneur. Did you actually decide you wanted to be an entrepreneur, or did you think, well, I'm going to buy some properties and let them out, or how did that happen?
Yeah, it was somewhat serendipitous. I'd wanted to be an entrepreneur, though not understanding the word, when I was a child. I saw my dad, and he worked for himself, and he always had a wad full of cash in his pocket, the big old £10 notes that were huge back then, like that, literally. The big paper ones, the big brown ones. And I was, And, my dad always instilled in me that, you offer value, you get paid, you can always get a job, you can always go and work. But I also saw that my dad was the boss, and I liked the idea of being the boss.
Yeah.
And that was instilled upon me probably from age 6. It was early. School and university and society sort of beat that out of me a little bit. But whilst I didn't succeed as an artist in that, I only just sort of made ends meet, it was my first venture where I was completely independent and it was my business. And so it was a great stepping stone for me.
Yeah.
But I was barely able to make a living, let alone a fortune. But one of my gallery owners at the time, 2006, kept saying to me, you should get into property. Everyone's in property. Property goes up in value all the time. You can do it, no money down. And he was telling me these things because he was doing it himself and he cared for me. And so, about that time, I wanted some independence. And if everyone else is making money in property, apparently, why can't I? So that was when I started researching, reading, going to events. And this was, end of 2005, early 2006.
Yeah. And obviously, I mentioned in the beginning about Progressive being a property company, but it's not just a property company, is it? It's a training company as well.
Yeah, we train there's progressive success and progressive property. We teach people how to be entrepreneurs, public speakers, business owners, property investors, how to create personal wealth, grow and leverage their social media following, be a creator on YouTube and podcasts.
Yeah.
So we've sort of expanded out. Basically, we teach what we do.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love your mantra. If you can't risk anything, if you don't risk anything, you risk everything. Could you just explain that to listeners and viewers?
Well, the biggest risk is taking no risk, because if you take no risk, you stay comfortable, and comfort is the enemy of greatness. And so many people want to do so much more with their lives, but they don't take the risk. But if they could go back in time 5, 10 or 20 years, they probably would.
Yeah.
And they always find an excuse. I'm too old, I'm too young, I've got kids, I can't afford it. But I think the biggest risk to your freedom and security and financial independence is by being too cautious and too risk averse.
Which I guess is a sort of fairly natural human trait. And
to be risk averse?
Yeah.
Depends on the human.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, I would have thought that, I certainly think that there's many people who think, actually, there must be something more than the drudgery of my everyday job that I go to every day. I want to invest. I want to be an entrepreneur. What would you say to those sorts of people?
Well, the first thing I would say is, what's the worst that can happen? And people, for example, I was talking to a personal trainer yesterday, and he was like, well, I haven't worked for a month, I need a new unit. I had a unit, and that unit has been pulled from under me, and I've got nowhere to train, and I need to go and find a new unit, but it's all a huge risk. And I said to him, what's the worst that can happen? And the worst that will happen is he'll go back to being a PT in someone else's gym and have to give them 50%.
Yeah.
That's not that bad, is it?
No.
But what if he doesn't get in the car? I told him, get in the car and drive around every business park that there is within 15 miles of where you live. You'll find a unit. And that's a small price to pay for success. So if you ask yourself what's the worst that can happen, for example, quitting a job you've been in for 20 years, what's the worst that can happen? You start a business, you're passionate into your profession, you do something you wanted to do your whole life, it doesn't quite work out, you go back to your job. At least you tried. And you'll never look back going, oh, what if? So, yeah, I think for me, the biggest risk is not trying. I have a rule, really. It's not a mantra, it's a rule. If I'm on the fence, I'll say yes. If I'm not sure, I'll say yes. And if I think it, I'll probably try it.
Yeah.
Because at least I'll know.
Yeah.
And I'll never know if I don't try.
No.
And, what is failure? Is failure to never try and never fail? Or is failure to try and fail and get up again? And try and fail and get up again? And what does that lead to? Success. So there is no success without failure. So some people are holding themselves back because they're scared of being a failure when in fact they need to fail more frequently.
And have you seen people that you, might be yourself, who've spoken to and sort of said, look, come on, go for it, like you did with that guy? Have you actually seen people do that and be successful?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's what I would not do what I do if people weren't successful from what I say to them and how I help them.
Yeah.
Now, not everyone, because you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
No.
But yeah, I mean, I've helped hundreds of thousands of people, and many of them have become successful entrepreneurs, and many of them haven't. And that's the way it is. If you own a martial arts dojo, how many people that turn up for the first session, do they even get to white belt? I bet you it's less than 50% of new students get to white belt. And then what percentage of white belts get to black belt? I'd be amazed if it's 10% of white belts ever get to black belt. This is normal.
Yeah. Just talking about your books. I mean, is it 18 books that you've
I've
got
just
now?
finished my 19th.
Oh, have you?
I can't call my 19th a bestseller because it's not launched yet. It's called Money Matrix.
Yeah.
And I'm also writing my 20th at the moment, which is called Money Loves You. Yeah.
What's your process for writing a book?
A book needs to form itself as a concept in my mind. And I write from experience. I'm not one of these deep theoretical researchers. And there's some good ones of those.
Yeah.
But that's not me. I like to live it and be it and breathe it, and the concept to form itself through my day-to-day living. And then once the idea is germinated, I like to do some testing and some polling to see which. So for example, my current book is called Money Matrix, which started to germinate itself through the lockdown. And then, when you find out what the money system is really up to.
Yeah.
And actually the original concept was called Money Revolution. And I did a poll in my communities and I said, Money Revolution, Money Evolution, or Money Matrix. And they were like, oh, Money Matrix. So that's how the concept formed itself.
Right.
And because if I've been living and breathing that concept for 2 or 3 years, I've got 2 or 3 years worth of content I've done on social media, which I can immediately take and put into the book as the main architecture of the book.
Yeah.
And then I go through and edit and write and edit and write and research and edit and write, and then I have researchers go out and research and I edit and write until it becomes a book. And it normally takes 30 to 90 days to write the manuscript, and then another 30 to 90 days to edit the manuscript. That's normally. Although Money was 250,000 words, the original manuscript, although they edited it down, my publishers. So that was probably 6 months to write.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for somebody who hasn't read any of your books and is perhaps wanting to be an investor, particularly in property, which book would you suggest they start with?
Well, probably Property Investing Secrets, and because it's the fundamentals of investing in property.
Yeah.
And then my non-property book, which is still linked to property, would probably be Money. Yeah, I wrote a book called Money, which has done very well in the UK. And I'm more specialising on the subject of money now. I want that to become my specialised subject.
I did sort of listen to 1 or 2 of your podcasts where you were talking about money, and particularly the money systems or system. And you've got some quite strong views on that, haven't you?
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on those, please?
Well, I suppose strong views depends on your existing views. But for example, I don't believe that the banks exist to look after your money. I believe the banks exist to make profit. Inflation is bad if you hold cash, but it's good if you have debt against assets, because it erodes cash and it erodes debt. If you're employed, you pay tax first. If you're an entrepreneur or business owner, you pay tax last. The financial system will never educate you about how money works, otherwise you can't be a product that they can consume for taxes and debt and loans and interest. So yeah, there's some of the fundamental concepts of the money system. You know, fiat currency is a depreciating liability, not an appreciating asset. The government's made it legally okay for them to trade insolvently, but it's illegal to trade insolvently as a business owner. And the government doesn't want to help you. You need to look after and manage and multiply your own wealth. And only when you take full personal responsibility will anything change.
Mm. And what do you think about the Bank of England's sort of almost monthly looking at inflation, saying, "Oh, we've got to put the interest rates up 0.25%." It's perhaps something that an algorithm could tell you that without a meeting, but they do it, don't they, every month? What do you think about that?
I think you'll never know the truth of monetary policy, because what actually goes on behind the closed doors in these boardrooms, these oak-panelled boardrooms from old Etonians, you'll never know. You'll only know what the BBC wants you to see. This is why I don't get most of my information from mainstream media. So I'm wise enough to know that what I see is not necessarily what is. So then I think, what is human nature? And what are the motives of the people in power? Probably power, money, profit. So, for example, they'll tell you stories of why it took them 12 years to increase interest rates. But in America, they increased interest rates a bit earlier, and the impact of the rise in increased interest rates is not as bad as it is here. They waited far too long. And of course, when you bang up interest rates, if you keep interest rates at basically naught for basically a decade, that's going to create all sorts of economic problems down the line. Yeah. But of course, they're trying to fix problems going back. They never really fix the problem, they just put a plaster on it. But the political system is all wrong. It needs a complete reform. Only really two parties are ever going to get in power. And the last two prime ministers we've had, there was no vote. No. It was an internal decision for Liz Truss and an internal decision for Rishi. So we've had two prime ministers who we, the people, have had no choice in. I mean, that's just fundamentally wrong. Therefore, there's no competition element to government. There's no competition element to the banks. You know, there's competition now with decentralised currencies and cryptos. That's how it always used to be. Before the Fed was created by a monopoly formation of a few number of small banks, big banks, a small number of big banks, there used to be loads of small challenger banks. And that used to create currency competition. It's virtually impossible to set up a bank now. So we have this controlled monopoly in the banking world and in government. But if you said to me, Rob, I've got this money printer here, it's just fit on your desk, give me 10 million and I'll give it to you and you can just print infinite amounts of money, I'd buy it off you. Yeah. So in some ways, human nature is human nature.
So do you think the whole system, not so much political, but the financial system is in need of a rehaul?
I think, the banking system, the monetary policy, the political system, which are all linked, the way corporations, big corporations especially, are treated, the tax code, I think they all need a major reform. Because actually, do you know that up to about 70% of what you earn and what you spend is tax? Most people don't know this. And they're never going to tell you it. But you pay tax twice on fuel. If you think about every fine, parking, speeding, it's a tax. You pay VAT on most of what you buy. It's a tax. Don't forget you're buying all this stuff with money you've already paid 50% tax on. So you've already been taxed, and then you're taxed again. Yeah. At least in Dubai, they tax you on what you buy, but they don't tax you on what you earn. I think tax us on what we buy, but don't tax us on what we earn, or vice versa. Seems fair, but don't take us both ways, which is what they do. And it's very hard now to make profit, and I'm proud that we do, when you've got, if I'm being extreme, I would say a corrupt system. If I'm being more compassionate, I would say an outdated system.
It was interesting earlier where you mentioned that you don't get your news from the mainstream media. You sort of have.
This is what's interesting. If I want to create something virally or clickbaity on social media, I'll go and check BBC. If I want some good credible information, I'm not going to BBC. I'll go straight to the source. The source is probably on Twitter or on some social media channel.
The primary source.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the problem is with mainstream media is it's dying. And so its neutrality, if it ever was there, has gone. Because it needs to create controversy. Because it needs to click, it desperately needs to click.
Hi, it's Bob here, just a quick interlude. Hope you're enjoying this episode. And if you would like to hear more interesting interviews, we have over 80 episodes to date with many fascinating guests talking about a wide variety of topics which include music, history, philosophy, fitness, food and drink, adventure, contemporary culture, and many, many more. I'm sure there's something that you'd really enjoy. So all you need to do is just visit undercurrentstories.com or search Undercurrent Stories in any of the podcast platforms. And now back to the show. Just going back to your podcast, Disruptors. I mean, you've obviously got another one as well, Money. But the Disruptors one's the big one. Of the guests that you've had, and you've had people like Chris Eubank, I think you mentioned earlier on, and Jordan Peterson. Which guests have left a sort of lasting impression with you?
I suppose it depends on the definition of lasting impression.
Well, when I said, I'll just qualify that, lasting impression in terms of, actually, I've learned something from these people, or you may not have. Yeah.
I've interviewed 20 billionaires. So if you can't learn something from a billionaire, you're not asking good questions. I always find Nigel Farage fascinating. He's been on the show, 3 times? And I know a lot of people don't like him, and they might even be getting triggered just by saying his name, but I don't care. I always find him fascinating, and the recent conversation was about the whole debanking process that happened to him. That was fascinating, and he's very politically intellectual. He's a great orator, very good speaker. And I get on well with him.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. So we have one of the most unique Jordan Peterson interviews out there, because we talked almost exclusively about being an entrepreneur, and I don't think he ever did many talks on that.
No.
So that was quite a good one, and that got many millions of views. Harry, what can you think of any? We've done so many.
Eubank, Tate, Ike.
Yeah, I mean...
Oh, David Icke, yes.
Harry said Eubank, Tate and Ike, because they're the 3 most polarising and controversial. You might as well have said Katie Hopkins.
Yeah.
And actually those have done very well. Yeah. And I don't mind courting some controversial figures, which a lot of people would probably shy away from. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, the Tate one was done before the latest sort of revelations, wasn't it? Or alleged revelation.
Well, yeah, he's not actually been convicted of any crime yet.
No.
So social media, I don't think, has the right to be judge and jury, in my opinion. And so I will stay balanced and honest about my experience with Andrew, which was all good. I realise that I am more likely to resonate as a middle-aged white male compared to if I was a 15-year-old female or the mother of a 15-year-old female. I may not resonate. I understand this. I think the guy deserves a fair trial, like anyone deserves a fair trial. And until he's been found guilty, my opinion won't change.
Yeah.
And we're actually going out to Romania to do a round 2.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, we'll get an exclusive on that because he says because of what's happened to him, he's had to hold back.
Right.
And he wants to be able to fully express, and that's going to be on our show. So that'll be interesting. Yeah.
One of the things I noticed was that you're quite, going back to money again, you're quite keen, and you obviously did this you went to a school to talk about money. I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, well, I went to probably one of the only few schools that's actually going to let me fully talk openly about money.
Locally in Peterborough?
No, it was Michaela, which is run by Catherine Burblesing, who's she might as well be an entrepreneur. And she's very clear in she has high volition in what she believes to be right.
Yeah.
And I really like her.
Yeah.
And she courts controversy, weirdly, because, there's silence in the corridors, and the way that the kids are taught is deemed to be too strict for many. My wife went and thought it was great. And yeah, we opened, they didn't have a library on finance. So I went down and opened the library, and I put my books, and we got some other authors I know, and we started their library, and I opened that library, and I did a talk with the kids, and they loved it.
Yeah, they seemed to.
Yeah,
it was interesting.
Yeah, it was good.
What sort of feedback did you get from them?
They loved it. They were very engaged. I mean, I was giving money away. That helped. In fact,
they didn't like that, did they? I think she took it back initially.
The kids loved it.
Oh, the kids loved it.
Catherine didn't. No, she wanted to take it back and distribute it equally, which surprises me because I don't think she's a communist. No. But I can understand why that was the case. It wasn't going to stop me being me, but I really enjoyed that. And I want to help the younger generation, but obviously communicating to teens or pre-teens is difficult to communicating to 35 and 45-year-old white males.
Yes.
So it was good for me in that regard, in that, because I don't get many chances. You're not going to see a normal private school, or even probably a normal state school, let me just unleash the governors. Who are they controlled by? I don't know, but the system does not want the schools teaching what I know, because it doesn't benefit them. Fair enough. I just have to rant on YouTube.
One thing I wanted to talk about was the boxing match. So I didn't bring my boxing gloves today, but
I'm one and done. I'm retired.
I'm
retired from competitive.
I mean that was quite impressive. I mean the amount of training that you must have done to do, but also you raised, what was it, $500,000 or something? $250,000.
Yeah, which I'm very proud of. Or just under. I mean, someone challenged me to a fight. He was 20 kilos heavier than me. I accepted. We filled a room full of 1,800 people.
This was Sam Leeds, who's also a property. In property.
And we put on a great show, entertained the crowd. I mean, I lost on a split decision. It was very close. Stylistically, I was better. But here's what it is. But we raised the money, and I got a lot fitter, and I did something that most people don't have the kahunas to do. So I feel good.
But you've retired now.
Yeah.
You're not going to do any more.
No, I mean, I know if I fought him at my weight, or 4 or 5 rounds, I know I'd win.
Yeah.
But my wife doesn't want me to do that. My business partner doesn't want me to do that.
No.
I'm moving on. There's other things in my life now, writing my books and, next challenge.
And just on that subject of the future, I mean, certainly in my life, and I'm starting to get on a little bit now, but over the last 20 years, it's been incredible with the various changes we've had, social media, smartphones, the Internet of Things, you're able to turn your heating on from miles away. So much change. And now, of course, everybody's talking about AI. And I was going to just pick your brain a little bit about what your thoughts were on AI in regard to people who perhaps already being employed and thinking to themselves, well, AI is going to take over my job. What should I do? What should young people do coming through the school system where AI is going to be part of?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that, Rob? What would you tell people?
Okay, so the first thing I would say is it's not new for a technology to come and replace human jobs. Henry Ford developed the factory line. And so, the automation of the factory line meant that many people stopped hand building cars. This is normal, this is evolution. So you either adapt or you die. So what I would say to young kids coming through is your advantage is you know how to use the internet and social media and the Internet of Things and technology way better than 65-year-old people. So use that to your advantage, and be the person that leverages and uses AI rather than the person that gets evolved out of AI. Because whilst AI will no doubtedly replace many jobs, it will also create many jobs. So I think it's an exciting opportunity. I mean, the big thing that scares me on AI is the dual use paradox, which is, AI could be used to, basically AI could become our own GP. And, we could probably not need to ever go to the doctor. It could be connected to our 3D printer, and it can diagnose us and probably, help us recover from ailments, injuries and disease. It could also, there was this fascinating documentary, AI and Robots, I think it was called. And this guy was developing, he was using AI to develop cures for diseases. And then he was asked to speak by a university, and they simply asked him to talk about the dangers of AI. And he went to his algorithm and he reversed the algorithm. Basically changed the 1 and 0. Which meant he, instead of asking it to find the cures, he said, ask it to find the most potent diseases and poisons. And he said it came up with 500 or 600 overnight on an average 6-year-old Mac PC like that.
So sort of created them?
It did, yeah. And he said many of them, were more deadly than the most deadly toxins that, exist. And that's the dual use paradox of AI, and that's something that I find fascinating.
And you could take that as weaponry as well, couldn't you?
Well, I mean, there's the dual use paradox in everything. You can use that glass to hydrate yourself, or you could smash it over my face. I know that Donald Trump has spoken with Putin about, let's just de-nuke all of our weapons. The Gatling gun was actually created to save needing men on the front line with rifles. So it was actually made to save lives. But you put the Gatling gun in front of a terrorist organisation and they're going to use it to take lives. So this dual use paradox exists in virtually anything, and I find that fascinating because most people don't know the dual use paradox. They don't know, for example, I write in my book, Money, that there's 13 great paradoxes of money. For example, philanthropists are money launderers as well as criminals, because philanthropists are cleaning money to give it away, but often they may have done it through making money out of oil or some other nefarious way. So that's a dual use paradox. Money doesn't make you happy, but it makes you happier if you use it well. That's a dual use. There's this chap, Brian Johnson, who I think we're going to interview. He's spending $2 million a year on reversing aging. You can't reverse aging on $200 a year. No. He needs $2 million a year to finance it. So, that in that regard, money is a very useful tool to him. Money makes a great servant, but a terrible master. So AI is one of the most pervasive modern technologies where it raises this dual use paradox. And, if I went on social media and said, well, the upside of this and the downside of this, and the reason this is good and the reason this is bad, it wouldn't get any engagement. You have to be one-sided and polar. But in reality, life isn't like that.
No. What other projects have you got coming up that you'd like to share with listeners?
I've just finished Money Matrix, which will come out in 2024. Money Loves Me. No, Money Loves You is the book I'm writing with Ryan Pinnock, and we've done 57,000 words on that. I'm just editing it at the moment. I'm going to write a lot of money books between now and age 50, where I plan to be one of the top recognised specialists, I don't like the word expert, specialists in money in the next 6 years. That's my goal. I would love to make an impact on society whereby money wasn't hyperinflated away, and that, entrepreneur realism is more recognised and supported by government. People who are sponging off the system unnecessarily are encouraged back to work and helped back to work. And our attitude towards work and production has changed, and we make the UK great again and attract. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, you know, Jaguar, Land Rover, you know, these great British companies.
Yeah.
They're all gone. They're all gone. Apparently there's not one British company in the top 50 companies in the world, and there's 3 in the top, 2 or 500. And one of them's AstraZeneca. So, like, we're not drawing in money, innovation, productivity, talent. I'd love to change all of that. I mean, I've only got 50 years left. That's not enough time.
It's a good vision to have, though.
Yeah,
and there are opportunities.
Yeah, I'm going to write a shitload of books, and I'm going to do a shitload of podcasts and social media content on this, and hopefully make a dent.
Well, it's been really interesting talking to you, Rob.
Thanks,
I
Bob.
think we've uncovered a lot more about you that people perhaps who've just listened to the podcast won't always get. So
Right.
thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
You have been listening to Undercurrent Stories. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share the show link to your friends and family, and if you have 60 seconds, I will be most grateful if you would please rate and review. To hear more episodes, please subscribe to the show and visit undercurrentstories.com. If you leave your email in the link, we will notify you as soon as new episodes are released. Also, check out our social media links, details of which can be found on the show notes. Until next time, this is Bob Wells wishing you all the very best.